And so nominal level variables, I gotta go back to that page, pardon me. Um, so what's going to happen, I got to pay more attention to, eventually I'll get better at recording these videos, so bear with me. I am not at all uh, uh, a content creator whatsoever. This is just me kind of doing the best I can. Um, so a nominal level variable is, again, one of those variables that you can't measure between one and the other. Why is this important? It's important because the type of variable determines the type of statistic that you can do. So, for example, if I wanted to give you an idea of how many people were Catholic in a particular group, I could not calculate the mean for the number of people who were there, meaning I could not give you an average number, like a numerical number for the number of people there who represent. Now, I can calculate a percentage. Now, a percentage is a specific type of measurement in statistics, right? It's a summary statistic, but it's a particular type of measurement within statistics which summarize the number of people who fall within that category. So, for example, I can again give you the percentage of people who were Catholic. 60% of people are Catholic. 30% of people are Protestant, right? And then the rest, I'm just going to numb them up and round them up as other, just for the purpose of just having this discussion here. So there you go. That's how you would sum it up. That's very different than, for example, the numerical category, where I could tell the difference between one group and the other. Whereas if the variable is nominal, I am limited to only giving you the percentage within each category. With an interval level variable or a ratio, which is a numerical variable, I tend to be able to give you an average that represents everybody. So I could say, if I were to take the number of people, ages for example, I can say, okay, the average age for this class is 18. Now, you're going there might be issues there, right? Because uh, I might have a large number of people in the class. Let's say out of 11 people in the class, 9 people are 18, right? One person is 17, but then the other person is 25, right? Now, again, the average number of people in the class would still be around 18. So I could say, oh, okay, there you go. My average number of people in the class is 18. But what about the 25-year-old? What about the 17-year-old? Well, there's actually a lot of things we could do once we deal with numbers, right? There's a lot of numerical stuff that we could do to give us an idea of, all right, the average of this group is 18. But now we start to say not everybody is 18, and we can actually then start doing, a lot more advanced stuff in order to give us an understanding of, not, what the group looks like, what is this age category among this group. So that's what the interval level data does. Nominal level data doesn't allow us to go into much more detail than usually provide a percentage, the number of people who are in this category, the number of people who are in that category. So that's usually where we're limited at. And this is why it's important to understand the level of measurement. The level of measurement tells you how much detail you can get. Now, I didn't speak about ordinal, and that's because ordinal actually can fall within two realms, right? Ordinal level variables can be very nominal like. So there might be a way to be able to determine one is greater than the other. Let's take social class. So let's say the difference, let's keep it very basic, right? Upper class, middle class, working class. Very basic. You could tell that someone who is working class is going to have certain characteristics that make up social class. Let's say income, let's say that education level, let's say, a handful of other things that we call, class, and that we're using to measure class. And we say, all right, this person meets the criteria to be identified as working class. Boom, right? This other person meets the criteria to be classified as higher class. Now, right, that means that the person is going to have more income, they're going to have probably a higher education level, they're going to have whatever other characteristics are going to be higher that we use to identify what class is compared to the person who was working class. So we can actually, right, say one is higher than the other, one is greater than the other. But the reality is that we can't tell by how much. And then, of course, not only can we not tell by how much, but social class is one of those categories that can be extremely problematic. What does it mean to be high class, or what does it mean to be middle class versus working class, right? In today's age, it typically doesn't mean that much, actually, right? Someone could be making only $20,000 a year and be middle class. Well, what makes them middle class? Well, maybe they have a college education. Maybe they have parents who had a college education, and they're just not making that much money. There could be tons of things that create the notion of what is middle class versus working class, right? We see the distinctions all the time, right? And so to label someone working class and to label someone middle class means that there are some things that we see to be distinct between these two groups, that there is possibly one measure that says this group tends to be slightly higher in certain categories than this other group. Education, for example, could be a simple one, right? Um, uh, Lifestyle as class, whatever we decide to have been using as parameters that identify what class is, right, could be part of that. But we do understand, right, that middle class usually implies slightly higher than working class on some of these different measures that are used to take class into account, right? So, but by how much? And does it really matter? Right? And that's where we think of it and we apply that type of variable. We use it as a nominal level variable, and instead, might just say, all right, what percent of people are working class? What percent of people are middle class? What percent of people are higher class? And that's usually where we stop there, right? So basically now the only thing we could do is talk about how many people fit in a specific category, right? So that limits the amount of analysis that we could do. It limits the way in which we can represent and talk about the data. Other variables that are ordinal variables are easier to use as interval level variables. Now, this is where we have a rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is kind of seven. Just use this as a rule of thumb. If it's got more than 7 categories and you can tell, then usually what we do is we start talking about it as if it's interval level variables, right? We treat it as its interval simply because now we can actually start to make distinctions between one and the other. We always remember I was talking about the social aspects of things? You always remember the social parts of it. Trying to think about a decent example to provide you here, but let me just give you something along the lines that might be for you to be able to consider just a little bit differently. So remember when I was talking about the age issue, right? How age tends to be greater than the other. Well, we could take, for example, the school level that you have and break it down into like basic categories: high school, college, graduate school, right? Now I could break that down into like elementary school, uh, or you know elementary school, secondary school, post-secondary school, or higher education, and then we could break them down into more categories, right? So we could start to look and see, right, using education as a way to make distinctions. Now we could tell 1 year is greater than the other, 1 year is less than the other, but we can also tell that someone who has a college degree has more years of education than someone who has a high school degree. So now we start to see that there are real distinctions that could be made between having one versus the other. And you could either turn them into numerical numbers and treat them as interval level data, or you could say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you treat them as interval level data. But you always have to remember that there's a social element to these numbers. And this is where it becomes kind of tricky, right? Like with the age example that I used, right, where the 15-year-old is dating a 22-year-old, right? That's statutory rape right there, right? That's illegal in most places, probably not Arkansas, but that's illegal in most places, right? So I think this is one of those things that you have to think about, right? Is always think about how these numbers represent actual human beings, right? This is the part that you always need to remember. All right, guys, I'm going to stop this here, read through this. I think you can kind of get an understanding of this, and then I'm going to start showing you some examples soon.